This week's blog post is part one of a series on Tuscany, which my husband and I visited in January 2024. It's going to cover planning, packing, and flights. Earlier this year, after 32 years of waiting and planning, my husband and I spent 10 days in Tuscany. Eventually, I'll post highlights of what we visited in Florence, Pisa, Siena, and Livorno. For starters, I want to offer some suggestions for other travelers, plus the answers to a bunch of questions that I didn't know enough to ask before we went. If you're a fan of combining planning with winging it when you travel, you might find some useful information here, even if you aren't heading to northern Italy anytime soon. So, starting with planning. I'm an art historian, and I love the Renaissance, so the list of places and artworks that I wanted to see in Tuscany has grown very, very long over the years. With only 10 days there, I had to set priorities. I did that by searching each item on my list in Wikipedia, on TripAdvisor, on the institution's website, and so on. And then I copy pasted that info, highlights the hours, the location, the tours, into a separate Word document. Looks like the one that's on the screen. Then I printed the pages out and I marked them with 1 or 2 or 3 stars for how urgently I wanted to see them, and highlighted the bits that I especially wanted to see. I carried these printouts with me to Italy, and I took the relevant pages with me on each day's outings. In defense of carrying paper, I feel like I miss less of what's going on around me if I have a paper with highlighted passages to look at rather than doing the scroll and squint thing on a cell phone screen. That's just me. Once I had my list of items, I put each one onto a color-coded private map in Google Maps so that I'd be able to see at a glance where things are in relation to each other. Looking at a Google map is a relatively small amount of scroll and squint. For example, if we visit the Uffizi and have a couple hours free afterwards, what's within walking distance? This is part of my map of Florence. I flagged the highest priority items in red, lower priority in orange, and lowest priority in yellow. At the end of the day, I changed items that we'd already visited to black so I could more easily ignore them the next day. Also, I changed the icons to show if the item was a museum, a church, a restaurant, a place with a view, and so on. The instructions on how to create your very own private Google map are at the URL at the bottom of the screen. I actually do this for every long trip that we go on, just to make it easier to see where we are. Okay, on to booking tours. My husband and I were traveling on our own, but we knew that some museums are more easily accessible on tours, or at least with advanced tickets. Also, we were arriving on New Year's Eve, and we knew Florence is very crowded during the holidays. So, a month or two before we left, my husband booked tours for major museums. My thinking about the timing for these tours was that it would be absolutely exhausting to do museums back to back, morning and afternoon for days on end. Also, I expected the museums to be more crowded on weekends when Italians as well as tourists might be there. So we booked the Accademia with Michelangelo's David, combined with a climbing the Duomo tour early on the morning of Tuesday, January 2nd, 2 days after our scheduled arrival, just in case the flight was delayed, which it was. We booked the Uffizi Gallery first thing on Thursday morning and the Bargello first thing on Friday morning. That gave us at least 3 afternoons to wander around Florence serendipitously. On the weekend, we planned to drive around the Tuscan countryside, and on the Monday and Tuesday before we left, we were free, so we would have time to visit any high-priority items that we missed. Couple notes on packing. In January, we expected lots of rain and temps in the 40s and 50s. Fahrenheit, of course. As it turned out, we had drizzle, but not much pouring rain. Although we packed 2 umbrellas and carried them for 1 or 2 days, a hat or hood was usually enough to keep the rain off. On one and only one day, it was chilly enough to wear gloves in the morning. The slides on screen are just to show you that Tuscany in January doesn't look like Tuscany in the middle of the summer. Word on clothes. Given how much walking and climbing we did, it turned out to be very important to have layers that we could peel off. I was comfortable first thing in the morning with a long sleeve shirt, plus a lightweight down jacket, plus a wind and rain resistant shell. I wore yoga pants or lightweight, quick-drying cargo pants, and my husband wore jeans. We both packed dressier clothes and shoes, but it turned out there was nowhere we felt the need to dress up. The Michelin-rated restaurant in Florence, Pinacoteca Pinchiori, looked like it would have required or deserved much dressier clothes, but it didn't open until 7. Even if we had wanted to eat that late, they were probably booked far in advance during the holiday week. We packed very comfortable shoes with soles that wouldn't slip on 500-year-old pavements and stairs. Figured if the soles wouldn't slip on the sort of polished concrete that they use in many American department stores, then the grip is probably okay. Food. You're allowed to bring sealed containers of food on planes. Should have brought some no sugar added peanut butter, jelly, and low carb flatbreads. We've been eating low carb for 20 years, and it turns out that although there's far less over-processed food in Italy than in the US, there are also no low-carb snacks except for bags of nuts. We always travel with a handful of Atkins bars to get us through plane rides and long drives when we don't want to stop for a proper meal. And finally, under packing, a thin foldable nylon tote bag is very useful for carrying extra layers, souvenirs, groceries, and so on. I bought one at a duty-free shop. It was 19 by 16 inches without the handles, and it was very, very useful. On to electronics and camera. We took 2 converters for European current. They are by the brand name is Foval. Because we took 2 laptops, 2 phones, a Kindle reader, headphones, and a camera, we also packed a surge protector strip with 5 outlets, plug into one of the converters. About a camera. My Sony SLR is more than 7 years old, but its large lens means that it takes better pictures than my cell phone does. I don't take photos of artworks with my cell phone unless the Sony's batteries run out. Your mileage on this will vary. And finally, photo backups. At the end of the day on any trip, I routinely download photos from the Sony camera to my laptop, and then I clear the SD card for the next day's photos. This time, my laptop's hard drive crashed irreparably on the 3rd day of the trip. Normally, the laptop would back up to Google Drive overnight, but the laptop seemed to be overheating when it was plugged into the converter, so I shut it down every night. So, no backup to the cloud. I lost 3 days' worth of photos, and that was infuriating. Next time, I'll buy enough SD cards so I don't have to clear the cards every night. Even if you don't use a camera, if you use your cell phone rather than an SLR, it's worth remembering to check that your phone settings will allow it to back up when you're away from home, even if that means paying for extra data. Next up, airline flights. We flew from Tampa International to Frankfurt and on to Florence. TSA PreCheck is great within the US, but I discovered it does not apply in foreign airports, so you have to allow enough layover time to wait on long security lines and long immigration lines. If you've got $800 or $1,000 to spare, a transatlantic flight is a really good time to upgrade. You get more space, you get food on demand, and you get rest to keep the blood from puddling in your feet. A few comments on Frankfurt Airport. I hate Frankfurt more than any airport I've ever been in. It is sprawling, complex, it has multiple levels. I am really good at keeping my bearings, and I even looked at a map of Frankfurt Airport before we got off the plane, but I found it impossible to figure out where I was or how long it would take me to get where I needed to be. If you're arriving from the US, you have to pass through European Union immigration, which is a long line, and security, which is another long line. Our plane arrived 2 hours late. Although we still had an hour to spare, we could not make our connection to Florence. If you're running late and or if it's a busy time of day, it is worth really hustling to get on the immigration and security lines ahead of the other passengers on your plane. I read later, after we got back, that if your flight is already listed on the departure board at Frankfurt, you can go to a fast lanes section at the security checkpoint. I didn't see any signs for that when we were actually at the Frankfurt airport. Food at the Frankfurt airport. We passed very few sit-down restaurants in the terminal. So if you want a sit-down meal and you are absolutely certain that you have enough time to make your connection, by which I mean you've got at least 3 hours, then stop as soon as you see a sit-down restaurant. Once we passed the final security checkpoint, there were only cafes with sandwiches and lukewarm pizza. There was no shopping beyond the final checkpoint either, except a duty-free shop. And final word on Frankfurt. Jetways are few and far between. Mostly passengers are taken to and from the plane by a shuttle bus, which means 15 to 30 extra minutes to make your connection. And once that bus has pulled away from the gate, there is no way for you to reach the plane. A major new terminal is under construction at Frankfurt. That might help. I don't know when it's slated to open. In contrast with Frankfurt is Florence Airport. Florence has one runway. It has such a small terminal that nobody even publishes maps online. It has a few, maybe only one restaurant. There is an ATM near the exit to the terminal where you can get euros if you haven't already. On our return trip, we walked through a really nice shopping area at the Florence airport, but on our arrival, we didn't see that area at all. So I wouldn't count on shopping at Florence airport. Next week, we will look at car rentals, driving in Italy, and dinner in Florence on New Year's Eve. Diane Durante Writer has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on dianedurantewriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.